The sun hung low over the Colorado Territory, painting the parched grasslands in shades of copper and rust. Samuel Hayes stood at the edge of his small homestead, watching the Rio Grande snake through the valley below like a ribbon of molten silver. At 28, he had the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much too young. Deep lines etched around storm-gray eyes, hands calloused from years of working unforgiving soil. 3 years had passed since cholera took his wife and infant daughter, leaving him with 60 acres of stubborn land and a heart that had forgotten how to hope. The other settlers in Cimarron Falls kept their distance, respecting his grief but marking him as the strange one who preferred the company of desert wind to human conversation. The afternoon heat shimmered off the red rock formations that jutted from the earth like ancient sentinels. Dust devils danced across the valley floor, and the air tasted of sage and coming storm. Samuel wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve already stiff with salt, then turned his attention back to mending the fence line that kept his few cattle from wandering into Apache territory. From his vantage point, he could see the ramshackle buildings of Cimarron Falls clustered around the single dirt road that served as Main Street, even from a mile away. He could imagine the conversations taking place in Morrison's General Store and the Broken Wheel Saloon, talk of Indian raids, missing livestock, and the latest rumors about Chief Red Sky's band camped somewhere in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Savages, they called them. Can't trust a one of them. Samuel had heard it all before. The fear and hatred that poisoned every mention of the Apache. Truth was, he'd had no trouble with them in his 3 years here. They moved through the land like ghosts, following paths older than memory, wanting nothing more than to be left alone. But fear was a powerful thing in a frontier town, and fear bred violence as surely as summer bred rattlesnakes. The western sky had begun to darken, not with the approach of evening, but with something more ominous. Thick, black clouds rolled in from the mountains, their bellies heavy with rain. The wind picked up, carrying the metallic scent of an approaching storm. Samuel's horses in the corral shifted nervously, their ears flicking back and forth. He'd seen flash floods before, walls of water that could turn a dry creek bed into a raging torrent in minutes. The Rio Grande, usually sluggish this time of year, was already running higher than normal from mountain snowmelt. Add a sudden downpour, and it would become a beast. Samuel was securing the last of his tools when he heard it. A cry that cut through the rising wind like a blade. Human. Definitely human. And filled with a terror that made his blood run cold. Without thinking, he dropped his hammer and ran toward the sound, his boots sliding on the loose scree as he descended the slope toward the river. The Rio Grande had already begun its transformation. What had been a manageable flow minutes before was now a churning mass of brown water, carrying branches, debris, and foam in its violent embrace. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark, horrific detail. There, a flash of movement in the water, a figure struggling against the current, arm flailing, going under, surfacing again. The geometric patterns on the clothing told him what his eyes could barely process. Apache, a woman, from the long black hair streaming behind her like a banner of distress. Samuel didn't hesitate. His mind, so careful and measured in all things since Mary's death, went blank except for one imperative: reach her before the river claimed her. He plunged into the torrent, the shock of cold water stealing his breath. The current immediately seized him, trying to drag him downstream toward the rapids he knew lay just around the bend. Fighting with every ounce of strength, he struck out toward where he'd last seen her. The water was chaos, a battering ram of liquid force that pounded his body and filled his mouth with grit. Branches struck him like clubs. His shoulders slammed into a submerged rock, sending lightning bolts of pain down his arm. But he pressed on, driven by something beyond rational thought. There, a hand breaking the surface. He lunged for it, missed, lunged again. This time his fingers closed around a wrist, slender but strong. He pulled, fighting the river's attempts to tear her away. For a moment, he saw her face, young, perhaps 20 summers, with high cheekbones and eyes wide with the knowledge of approaching death. "Hold on!" he shouted. though his words were swallowed by the roar of water. She was tall for a woman, nearly matching his own height, which made her heavier in the water but also stronger. Together they fought toward shore, Samuel using his knowledge of the river's currents to angle them toward a calmer eddy near the bank. His muscles screamed in protest. His lungs burned for air, but he didn't let go. Finally, blessedly, his boots found purchase on the riverbed. He hauled them both onto a sandy spit, collapsing beside her as they gasped for breath like landed fish. The rain had begun in earnest now, pelting them with drops the size of rifle balls. Samuel forced himself to his knees, checking if she still breathed. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, and when he gently turned her head to let water drain from her mouth, she coughed violently, expelling river water and drawing in desperate gulps of air. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with difficulty. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, white man and Apache woman, united by near death and the strange intimacy of survival. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but clear. The English carefully pronounced, "You saved me." Samuel sat back on his heels, suddenly aware of a dozen aches and pains. Anyone would have done the same. A bitter smile touched her lips. No, not anyone. Not for Apache. She tried to sit up, winced, and he saw blood seeping through a tear in her buckskin dress, a gash along her ribs where the river had dragged her across rocks. Without thinking, he shrugged off his coat and pressed it against the wound. "I am Ayana," she said, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "Daughter of Chief Red Sky." She paused, seeming to gather strength. "You have saved the blood of his blood. This will not be forgotten." Samuel felt the weight of her words settle on him like a physical thing. He knew enough about Apache culture to understand the significance. Honor debts were serious business, especially when they involved a chief's family. "Samuel Hayes," he replied simply. "Can you walk? My place isn't far. You need that wound tended." She nodded, accepting his offered hand to stand. Even injured and half-drowned, she carried herself with a dignity that made him acutely aware of his own rough appearance. As they began the slow climb toward his homestead, the storm continued its fury, but somehow it seemed less threatening now. Neither of them noticed the rider on the distant ridge, who had witnessed the entire rescue before wheeling his horse around and galloping back toward Cimarron Falls with news that would set the whole town ablaze with gossip. Samuel Hayes, the hermit, had pulled an Indian woman from the river. And not just any Indian, if the rider's eyes hadn't deceived him. It was one of Red Sky's people. By morning, everyone would know. And in a town already balanced on a knife's edge of fear and prejudice. Samuel had just upset the balance in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The storm lashed Samuel's small cabin with a fury that seemed personal, as if the sky itself disapproved of the Apache woman sheltering beneath his roof. Rain hammered against the oiled paper windows, while thunder rolled through the valley like artillery fire. Inside, the single room glowed with the warm light of a pine knot fire, filling the air with the sharp, resinous scent of burning sap. Ayana sat on a wooden stool near the hearth, her back straight despite her injury, watching Samuel's every movement with eyes that missed nothing. Her wet buckskin steamed in the heat, and she'd accepted his offer of a wool blanket to wrap around her shoulders, though her right hand never strayed far from the bone-handled knife at her belt. "You should let me look at that wound properly," Samuel said, setting a pot of water on the iron spider over the flames. "It needs cleaning, maybe stitching." She studied him for a long moment. This white man who lived alone like a hermit, whose cabin held the ghost presence of a woman in small touches, embroidered curtains now faded, a china cup on a shelf too delicate for a man's hands. "Finally," she nodded, loosening the blanket enough to reveal the gash along her ribs. Samuel worked in silence, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made her breath hiss between clenched teeth, but drew no other sound of pain. Her skin was darker than his, marked with old scars that spoke of a hard life, but there was strength in the muscles beneath. This was no sheltered town woman, but someone who'd ridden horses since childhood, hunted game, survived in country that killed the weak without mercy. "You're lucky," he said, threading a needle with hands steadier than his racing pulse. It's not deep. Won't need many stitches. Lucky, she repeated, and there was something like bitter amusement in her voice. Yes, lucky the river didn't take me. Lucky a white man saw me drowning. Lucky he was different. The needle paused. Different how? You pulled Apache from water. In Cimarron Falls, they would watch me drown, make wagers on how long before I went under. Samuel resumed his work, each stitch neat and precise. You seem to speak from experience. My mother, Ayanna said quietly. She was Mexican, taken in raid when young, became my father's wife, taught me Spanish, English, said knowing enemy's tongue is another kind of weapon. She drew a sharp breath as the needle bit deep, but she also said sometimes, very rare. You find one who sees person, not just Apache. Maybe she was right. Outside, wind howled around the corners of the cabin like a living thing. Something, a branch, maybe, struck the door with a bang that made them both tense. Ayanna's hand went to her knife, but Samuel just shook his head. Storm's getting worse. You'll have to stay until it passes. Her eyes narrowed. Your people will talk. Let them. He tied off the last stitch, stepped back. There, that should hold if you don't move too sudden. He turned away, busying himself with putting away his medical supplies, very aware of her gaze on his back. Are you hungry? I've got beans, salt pork, some cornbread from yesterday. Why do you live alone? The question came sudden as a lightning strike. Where is your woman? Samuel's hand stilled on the tin box of medical supplies. Through the window. Lightning illuminated the 2 wooden crosses on the hill behind his cabin, though she couldn't see them from where she sat. Dead, he said simply. 3 years passed. Cholera took her and our daughter both. Ayanna made a small sound, not quite sympathy, more like recognition. Death walks with all of us. My brother felt a soldier's bullet last winter. My cousin to the coughing sickness. This is why I was alone by river, gathering medicine plants. The old grandmother who knew these things died in the last moon. Now I must learn, or more will follow. Samuel turned back to face her, seeing her anew, not just a chief's daughter but a healer, trying to fill shoes too large for her. He knew that weight, the burden of being suddenly responsible for things you'd never prepared for. He prepared a simple meal, and they ate in companionable silence while the storm raged outside. She used her fingers and knife as utensils, efficiently and without self-consciousness, while he found himself oddly aware of his own movements, the scrape of his spoon against the tin plate too loud in the small space. Your father, Samuel ventured. Chief Red Sky. They say his band has been raiding the settlements to the south. Ayanna's expression hardened. They say many things. They say Apache are savage, without honor. They say we steal children and burn families in their homes. She set down her plate with careful deliberation. What they don't say is that soldiers burned our winter camp 2 moons ago. Women and children inside wickiups. What they don't say is ranchers poison water holes, so our horses die. What they don't say is they break every treaty before ink is dry. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the sharp planes of her cheekbones, the determined set of her jaw. Samuel found himself thinking she was handsome rather than pretty, with a fierce beauty that owed nothing to softness. I'm not defending them, he said quietly. Lord knows I've seen enough ugliness on both sides. Just trying to understand what I might be bringing down on my head by helping you. You think my father will raid you for saving his daughter? I think your father will do what he thinks best for his people. And I think my neighbors will do what fear tells them to do. And somewhere in the middle of all that, there's you and me, and a debt that won't be easily forgotten. She was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You are a strange man. Samuel Hayes. You speak of debt, but I see no expectation in your eyes. You saved me because that is who you are. Like my mother said, one who sees person first. A log collapsed in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. The storm seemed to be moving past, the thunder growing more distant, though rain still drummed steadily on the roof. In the morning, she would leave, return to her people, and he would face whatever consequences came from this night. But for now, in the warm circle of firelight, with the storm holding the rest of the world at bay, there was an unexpected peace. "Tell me about the medicine plants," Samuel said. "My wife, Mary, she knew some healing. Learned from her grandmother back in Ohio. Maybe it's not so different." Ayanna's eyes lit with interest. "Your woman was healer?" "Of sorts. She knew herbs for fever, poultices for wounds, had a garden full of things I couldn't name." He smiled at the memory. "She tried to teach me, but I was always better with horses than plants." They talked through the night, trading knowledge of healing plants and their uses. She showed him the soggy remains of what she'd gathered: willow bark for pain, desert mallow for cough, juniper for cleansing wounds. He told her about Mary's remedies: comfrey for bones, calendula for skin, echinacea for sickness. Their words built a fragile bridge across the chasm of their differences, each story a plank laid down with careful hope. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky a pale gray, the storm finally exhausted itself. Ayanna rose, moving carefully to favor her injured side. The blanket fell away, and she stood proud and tall despite her wound. Every inch a chief's daughter. "I must go. My father will have searchers out." Samuel nodded, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of the cabin's emptiness once she left. "Will you be all right? That wound will heal, thanks to you." She paused at the door, one hand on the rough wood. "Samuel Hayes, this debt, it is not small thing. My father will know of it. The people will know. I don't want what you want and what is. These are different things. You saved Daughter of Red Sky. This makes you under our protection, but also makes you target for those who hate us. Be careful." She stepped out into the gray morning, and he followed. The world looked washed clean, puddles reflecting the lightening sky, the air sharp with the scent of wet earth and sage. In the distance, a hawk circled, crying its hunger to the dawn. Ayanna looked back once, and in her dark eyes he saw something that made his breath catch. Not gratitude, exactly, but a recognition, as if she too felt the strange pull of connection forged in extremity. Then she was gone, moving down the trail with the fluid grace of one born to this land, leaving only footprints in the mud and the memory of firelight on her face. Samuel stood in his doorway long after she disappeared, watching the sun break over the mountains and trying to convince himself that the hollow feeling in his chest was just the echo of an empty house. Nothing more. The news spread through Cimarron Falls like wildfire in dry grass. By the time Samuel rode into town 3 days later for supplies, every eye followed his progress down Main Street with the weight of judgment and suspicion. Conversations died as he passed, only to spring up again in hushed whispers behind his back. At Morrison's General Store, the usual morning crowd of ranchers and townsmen fell silent when he pushed through the door. Jake Morrison, a thin man with nervous hands and a merchant's calculating eyes, barely met his gaze as Samuel placed his order for flour, coffee, and ammunition. "Heard you had some excitement out your way," said Tom Brennan from where he leaned against the counter, his voice carrying the false casualness of a man spoiling for confrontation. Brennan ran cattle on the land adjacent to Samuel's, and had never made secret his belief that the only good Apache was a dead one. Samuel continued examining a bridle, running his fingers along the leather to check for weak spots. Storm was pretty bad, lost some fence posts. "That ain't the kind of excitement I'm talking about." Brennan spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon with practiced accuracy. "Folks saw you pulling one of them savages from the river. A woman, they say." The store had gone dead quiet now, even the creak of the floorboards seeming to pause in anticipation. Samuel set down the bridle with deliberate care and turned to face Brennan. "I pulled a drowning person from the river," he said evenly. "Would have done the same for anyone. Anyone." This from Cornelius Pike, a grizzled buffalo hunter who'd lost 2 fingers to frostbite and his oldest son to an Apache raid 5 years back. You'd save the very savages that slit your throat soon as look at you? The woman I saved wasn't trying to slit anyone's throat. She was drowning. They're all the same. Pike growled, his mutilated hand clenching into a fist. Man, woman, child. They're born killers. Every one. You saved one today. She'll be back tomorrow with a war party to lift your scalp. Samuel felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. That's where you're wrong. Pike, they're people. Same as us. Some good, some bad. Most just trying to survive. The silence that followed was ugly, pregnant with unspoken threats. Then Brennan laughed, a harsh sound like the bark of a coyote. Listen to him, boys. 3 years living alone has made Hayes soft in the head. Next he'll be telling us we should invite them red devils to Sunday service. Maybe if we did, there'd be less killing on both sides. Samuel shot back. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Several men shifted position, hands moving unconsciously toward weapons. Jake Morrison cleared his throat nervously. Now, gentlemen, let's all calm down. Samuel, I'll have your order ready directly. Perhaps it'd be best if you— If he what? Jake? The new voice came from the doorway, where Marshal William Tate stood silhouetted against the morning light, a former cavalry officer with steel-gray hair and eyes to match. Tate commanded respect through presence alone. If he conducted his business and went home peacefully, that seems reasonable to me. The crowd shifted uneasily. Tate might be the law in Cimarron Falls, but his moderate stance on the Apache question had won him few friends among the hardliners. Marshal, Brennan said, you should know Hayes here has been consorting with the enemy. Brought that savage woman right to his home. Kept her there all night. Who knows what all went on? What went on? Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp now with anger. Was basic Christian charity. I tended her wounds and gave her shelter from the storm. Come morning, she left. End of story. Christian charity. Pike spat. 2 heathens who worship devils and dance in the blood of white folks. That's enough. Tate stepped fully into the store, his badge catching the light from the window. Samuel Hayes broke no laws. Man's got a right to help whoever he sees fit on his own property. Anyone has a problem with that. They can take it up with me. The threat of official intervention took some of the heat out of the room, though the underlying tension remained thick as molasses. Samuel paid for his goods, noting how Jake Morrison handled his money like it might be contaminated, and loaded his supplies onto his pack horse under the hostile gaze of half the town. As he prepared to mount up, Tate appeared at his elbow. A word. Hayes. They walked a few steps away from the others, stopping in the shadow of the bank building. Tate pulled out a cigar, lit it with careful deliberation, then fixed Samuel with a steady gaze. I meant what I said in there. You broke no laws, but laws and wisdom aren't always the same thing. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, and these particular hornets have stingers. I couldn't let her drown. Marshal, no, I don't suppose you could. Heard about Mary and little Sarah. Man who's lost like that. Sometimes it changes how he sees the world. Tate took a long draw on his cigar. But seeing different and living safe are 2 different things. These men, they're scared. Scared of the Apache. Scared of losing what little they've carved out of this hard land. Scared men do stupid, violent things. Are you warning me off? I'm telling you to watch your back, and maybe think about taking a trip somewhere for a few weeks. Let tempers cool. Samuel shook his head. Can't do that. Got stock to tend. Crops to bring in. This is my home. Marshal, I won't be run off by fear and ignorance. Tate sighed, smoke wreathing his weathered face. Stubborn as your old man, aren't you? He was the same way, standing up to the Missouri bushwhackers before the war. Got him killed in the end. The mention of his father brought Samuel up short. Few in Cimarron Falls knew he was John Hayes's son. The same John Hayes who'd helped runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad until Confederate sympathizers burned his farm with him inside it. You knew my father? Crossed paths a few times. Good man, principled. But principles can be cold comfort to a corpse. Tate dropped his cigar and ground it under his boot heel. Just be careful. Hayes, the Apache aren't the only dangers in this country." As Samuel rode out of town, he felt the weight of eyes on his back like a physical thing. From the saloon doorway, a group of buffalo hunters watched his departure with expressions that promised trouble. One of them, a mean-spirited drifter named Carl Stokes, made a gesture across his throat that needed no interpretation. The ride home seemed longer than usual. Every shadow potentially hiding threat. Every distant rider a possible enemy. Samuel found himself checking his rifle's action and loosening his revolver in its holster. Habits from the war he'd thought long buried, but it wasn't fear that dominated his thoughts as the miles rolled by. Instead, he found himself remembering the firelight playing across Ayanna's face, the careful way she'd spoken of healing plants, the surprising ease of their conversation despite the chasm between their worlds. He'd been alone so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to truly talk with someone, to share more than just pleasantries and business. That evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sun paint the mountains crimson, Samuel noticed the tracks. Unshod horses had passed near his property line, though not crossing onto his land. Apache scouts, perhaps, checking on the white man who'd saved their chief's daughter. The knowledge should have worried him more than it did. Inside the cabin, the smell of last night's fire still lingered, and he could almost see her sitting by the hearth, proud and wary and unexpectedly gentle when speaking of medicine and loss. He'd thought himself done with such feelings, his heart buried with Mary and Sarah on that barren hillside. But something had stirred in those dark hours of storm and conversation, something he wasn't ready to name. From the town's direction came the faint sound of gunshots, probably drunken cowboys shooting at the moon. But Samuel knew the real storm was still building, and when it broke, it would make that night's tempest seem like a gentle rain. The question was whether he'd weather it alone, or if the death of a chief's daughter might prove shield as well as target. He checked his rifle one more time and went inside, barring the door against more than just the desert wind. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the cloudless sky when Samuel heard them coming, the rhythmic thunder of many horses approaching from the north. He'd been lying awake, unable to find rest in the thick heat of the summer night, when the sound reached him. Not the chaotic noise of a raid, but something more deliberate, more ceremonial. He rose quickly, pulling on trousers and boots, checking the loads in his Winchester before stepping out onto the porch. The sound grew louder, accompanied now by a low chanting that raised the hair on his arms. This was no war party sneaking through darkness. They wanted to be heard. They crested the ridge in a long line, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. Samuel counted 20, 30, 50 riders. His mouth went dry as the count continued. By the time they'd formed a great semicircle around his cabin, he'd reached 100 warriors, each sitting their horse with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. Torches flared to life, casting dancing shadows across painted faces and gleaming weapons. The chanting stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the snorting of horses and the creak of leather in the desert silence. Samuel stood very still, rifle held loosely across his body, trying to project calm he didn't feel. A single rider moved forward from the center of the line. Even in the torchlight, Samuel could see this was someone of importance. The horse was magnificent, a black stallion with a white blaze, and the rider sat tall despite his obvious age. His hair, streaked with gray, was bound with eagle feathers, and a necklace of bear claws gleamed against his chest. This had to be Red Sky. The chief studied Samuel for a long moment, his face unreadable as weathered stone. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of mountains and deep rivers. "Samuel Hayes." The English was accented but clear. "You're the one who took my daughter from the angry water." It wasn't a question, but Samuel nodded anyway. "She was drowning. Anyone would have—" Red Sky raised a hand, cutting him off. "Not anyone. You risked your life for Apache woman. This is debt that must be answered." He made a gesture, and 6 warriors dismounted, moving forward with bundles in their arms. They laid these at Samuel's feet with surprising gentleness. Soft buffalo hides, worked with beautiful patterns, silver jewelry that caught the torchlight. a war lance decorated with eagle feathers, bags that gave off the scent of herbs and sacred plants. These gifts are small beside life of daughter. Red Sky continued. But there is more. Another gesture brought forward a young warrior leading a horse, a painted mare with intelligent eyes and legs built for speed and endurance. The warrior handed the lead rope to Samuel, who took it numbly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. "This is only beginning," Red Sky said. "You are now under protection of my people. Any who raise hand against you raise hand against all Apache. This I swear on bones of my fathers." The words rang with ceremonial weight, and Samuel understood he was witnessing something sacred, something that would be remembered and retold around Apache fires for generations. But understanding didn't make it easier to process. "Chief Red Sky," he began carefully, "I'm honored by your gifts and your protection, but I need no reward for doing what was right. Your daughter lives. That's enough." For the first time, the chief's expression shifted, something almost like a smile touching his weathered features. "You speak like man of honor. This is good. But debt exists whether you accept or no. My daughter Ayana, she tells me you are different from others in the white man's town. She says you see with clear eyes." At the mention of her name, Samuel's heart did something complicated in his chest. "How is she? The wound?" "She heals. She speaks of you." Red Sky paused, seeming to weigh his words. "She says you knew of healing plants, that you spoke of your woman who died with respect and sorrow, that you treated her not as Apache, but as woman in need." The chief dismounted then, moving with the careful dignity of age but still radiating power. He approached Samuel, stopping just outside the reach of a knife thrust, a warrior's instinctive spacing. "I know what white men in town say of us," Red Sky continued, "that we are savage, without honor, that we kill for joy of killing. Some of this is true. There are those among us who have let hate poison their hearts, just as there are among your people. But I tell you now, Samuel Hayes, I am not such a man. I make war when I must, to protect my people, but I know also the value of peace." Samuel found his voice. "I believe you, but your protection might be more danger than help. The town already suspects me of sympathizing with your people. If they learn of this, they will learn." Red Sky said simply, "By dawn, every white man for 50 miles will know Red Sky has claimed you as friend. Some will fear to touch you because of it. Others," he shrugged, "others will hate you more. This is the way of things. A man must choose where he stands." The old chief reached into a pouch at his belt, withdrawing something wrapped in soft leather. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a silver medallion on a leather cord. The metal was old, Spanish from the look of it, with symbols Samuel couldn't read. This was gift from Spanish priest. Many seasons past, he said it would protect the wearer from evil. I do not believe in his God, but the man was kind to my people in time of sickness. I give it now to you. Wear it, and any Apache who sees will know you are friend." Samuel took the medallion with hands that weren't quite steady. The silver was warm from the chief's touch, heavy with meaning he was only beginning to understand. "Now," Red Sky said, stepping back, "I make you offer. There will be council in 3 suns, at the place where 3 rivers meet. You know this place?" Samuel nodded. 3 Rivers was a known neutral ground, used for parleys between the Apache and the army. "Come to this council. There are things that must be spoken, plans that must be made. The war between our peoples grows worse. Maybe man who sees with clear eyes can help find different path." "I'm just one man," Samuel protested. "A farmer. I have no influence with the army or the town. One man who does right thing can change much." Red Sky replied, "Think on it. The choice is yours." He turned to go, then paused. "My daughter, she would speak with you again, I think, at the council, if you come." There was something in his voice, a father's knowing mixed with resignation. "She is stubborn, like her mother was. When Ayana decides a thing, mountains are easier to move." The chief mounted his horse with surprising agility. Raising his lance high, the other warriors responded with a cry that echoed off the canyon walls. then wheeled their horses as one and thundered back into the darkness. In moments, they were gone, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats in their wake. Samuel stood alone in his yard, surrounded by riches he'd never asked for, holding a medallion that marked him as friend to those his neighbors called enemy. The painted mare nickered softly, and he absently stroked her neck, his mind churning with the implications of what had just happened. Inside, he lit a lamp and examined the gifts more closely. The buffalo robes were incredibly soft, worked with a skill that put Eastern craftsmen to shame. The silver jewelry was a mix of Spanish and Apache design. Speaking of long interaction between cultures, the herbs in their decorated bags gave off scents both familiar and strange. Some he recognized from Ayana's descriptions, others completely foreign to his experience. The lance troubled him most. It was clearly a warrior's weapon, decorated with honors that spoke of battles won and enemies defeated. To give such a thing to an outsider was unprecedented. It marked him not just as friend, but as warrior in their eyes, someone worthy of respect and martial honor. Samuel sat on his porch as dawn approached, watching the sky lighten from black to deep purple to rose. He thought of Ayana, of her fierce dignity and surprising gentleness. He thought of the council at Three Rivers, of the choice Red Sky had laid before him. He thought of the town's reaction when they learned of this night's events. Most of all, he thought of Mary, wondering what she would have said. She'd had a gentle heart but a spine of steel when it came to doing right. "The Lord puts us where we're needed," she used to say. "It's up to us to see the work that needs doing." The work that needed doing seemed clear enough, finding a path to peace between peoples bent on destroying each other. But the cost of that work, the dangers it would bring, those were clear too. As the first rays of sun touched the mountains, painting them gold and crimson, Samuel made his decision. He would go to Three Rivers. He would sit in council with Red Sky and hear what the chief had to say. And if Ayana happened to be there, he touched the medallion at his throat, feeling the weight of it against his chest. Whatever came next, he was committed now. The debt of a saved life had become something larger, something that might reshape not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone in this hard, beautiful land. The painted mare whinnied, eager for the new day, and Samuel allowed himself a small smile. At least he wouldn't face whatever came alone. The feast at Three Rivers was unlike anything Samuel had experienced. He'd arrived at sunset, following a winding trail through canyon country that few white men knew, to find the Apache camp already established in a great circle beside the confluence of waters. Cooking fires sent smoke spiraling into the purple sky, and the air was rich with the scents of roasting venison, wild onions, and herbs he couldn't name. Red Sky himself greeted Samuel at the edge of camp, clasping his arm in the warrior's fashion. "You came. This is good. Come. There is much to speak of, but first we eat." The chief's lodge was larger than the others, though not ostentatious. Buffalo hides painted with geometric patterns and scenes of hunts formed the walls, and the ground inside was covered with woven blankets of intricate design. Samuel was given a place of honor to Red Sky's right, across from the chief's elderly mother, a woman whose face was a map of years but whose eyes remained sharp as obsidian. Then Ayana entered, and Samuel forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of soft white doeskin decorated with blue beads and silver ornaments. Her long black hair was bound with strips of red cloth and adorned with eagle feathers. The wound from the river had healed to a thin line along her ribs, barely visible. She moved with the same grace he remembered, but there was something different now, a softness in her expression when her eyes found his. "Samuel Hayes," she said formally, though he caught the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "You honor us with your presence." She sat beside her grandmother, close enough that he could smell the sage and sweet grass in her hair. Throughout the meal, their eyes would meet across the fire, holding for moments that stretched like pulled taffy before one or the other looked away. The feast was elaborate, venison that fell apart at a touch, roasted agave hearts sweet as candy, flat bread made from mesquite flour, and a stew rich with wild herbs and roots. Warriors told stories of great hunts and battles, while women sang ancient songs that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Children peered at Samuel with curious eyes, giggling when he smiled at them. "Your people know how to make a man feel welcome," Samuel said to Red Sky as they ate. "A man who saves the chief's daughter is not stranger, but family." Red Sky replied, "This the people understand." As the formal meal concluded, the atmosphere relaxed. Younger warriors demonstrated their skills with bow and lance, while others wagered on games of chance. A group of women worked on a large blanket, their fingers flying as they wove patterns that seemed to capture the very essence of the desert landscape. Ayanna appeared at Samuel's elbow as he watched two boys practice with miniature bows. "Walk with me." They strolled along the river, always in sight of the camp, but far enough for private conversation. The last light was fading from the sky, and the first stars had begun their nightly dance. "Your wound healed well," Samuel observed, struggling for something to say that didn't sound foolish. "Thanks to your care." She glanced at him sideways. "Though grandmother says the scar will remain, a reminder of the day the river tried to claim me and a white man said no." "I'm glad you're well." They walked in silence for a moment before she spoke again. "My father told me of his visit to your home, of the gifts given and the promise made. Some among the people say he goes too far, trusting a white man." "What do you think?" Samuel considered his words carefully. "I think your father is a wise man trying to find a path through dangerous times. Whether I'm worthy of his trust, that remains to be seen." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. In the gathering darkness, her eyes were deep pools reflecting the first stars. "I have not thanked you properly. In the water, I thought my spirit would leave my body. I saw the other world approaching, felt my ancestors calling. Then your hand found mine, and you pulled me back to this world. Such a debt cannot be repaid with gifts or promises. I asked for no payment. No, you didn't. That is why the debt is so heavy." She reached out, her fingers brushing the medallion visible at his throat. "You wear my father's protection. Do you understand what this means?" "I'm beginning to. It means any Apache who harms you brings dishonor to all the people. It means in times of trouble, you can claim shelter and aid from any of our bands. It means—" She paused, her hand still near his chest. "It means you are no longer fully of the white world, whether you know it or not." The touch of her fingers, light as it was, seemed to burn through his shirt. Samuel caught her hand gently, meaning to move it away, but somehow found himself holding it instead. Her skin was calloused from work, but soft in the places between, and her pulse fluttered against his palm like a captured bird. "Ayanna, I know," she said softly. "I know all the reasons this is foolish. Your people and mine, the hatred, the wars, the blood already spilled. I know my father hopes for peace but prepares for war. I know you will return to your world and I to mine. I know all this. And yet—" "And yet," his voice came out rougher than intended. "And yet when I was drowning, it was your face I saw. When fever took me that night, it was your voice that called me back. When I sleep, sometimes I dream of sitting by your fire, learning the healing plants your woman knew." She looked down at their joined hands. "Grandmother says the spirits sometimes bind souls together in moments of life and death. She says fighting such bonds is like fighting the wind, much effort for no gain." Samuel's thumb traced the ridges of her knuckles, marveling at how right her hand felt in his. "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "Wise and meddling," Ayanna said with a soft laugh. "She has done nothing but speak of you since she learned of the river. When will the white healer visit again? Has he a woman now? Are his eyes truly the color of winter sky? I think she plots like an old spider." "And what does her granddaughter think?" The playfulness faded from her expression. "Her granddaughter thinks the world is changing too fast, that soon there will be no place for the people to live as we have always lived, that perhaps bonds between enemies might be the only bridges left when the flood comes." She squeezed his hand once, then let go. But her granddaughter also knows that bridges can burn from either side. They turned back toward camp. walking closer together than propriety might dictate. The sound of drums had begun, a deep rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the earth itself. In the main circle, dancers had begun to move, their shadows wild against the firelight. "You will stay for the dancing?" Ayanna asked. "It is important, a way of asking the spirits to bless new friendships." "I'll stay." They rejoined the others as the formal dancing began. Samuel was given a place of honor near Red Sky, but his attention kept drifting to where Ayanna sat with the women. She had added her voice to their singing, a low, haunting melody that wound around the drum beats like smoke around flame. An elder rose to speak, telling in the Apache tongue what Samuel gathered was the story of his rescue of Ayanna, though he couldn't understand the words. He recognized the universal rhythm of storytelling, the build of tension, the moment of crisis, the resolution. When the elder finished, many eyes turned to him with expressions of respect and curiosity. Red Sky leaned close. "He tells them you fought the river spirit for my daughter's life, that you won because your heart was pure. The people will remember this story." As the night deepened, the formal dances gave way to more casual celebration. Young warriors showed off for giggling maidens. Children ran between the fires, playing elaborate games of tag, and the elders gossiped and gambled with the contentment of those who had survived to see another season. Ayanna appeared at his side as if materialized from shadow. "Come, there is something I would show you." She led him to the edge of camp where a small fire burned apart from the others. Beside it sat an array of plants and herbs, some fresh, others dried and bundled. "These are the medicines I gathered the day of the storm," she explained, settling gracefully beside the fire. "I thought, perhaps we could trade knowledge as we did that night. Your Mary's wisdom for what I have learned." They spent the next hours in intimate conversation, heads bent together over plants and preparations. She showed him how to prepare willow bark for the strongest effect, how to identify the best specimens of desert mallow, which roots could save a life and which would end it. He shared what he remembered of Mary's remedies, surprised at how much had stayed with him. The moon was high when Red Sky found them, still deep in discussion. The chief's expression was knowing but not disapproving. "The council begins soon," he said simply. "There are things that must be decided." As Ayanna gathered her medicines, she pressed a small bundle into Samuel's hands. "For your healing bag," she said softly, "and so you do not forget this night." The bundle contained several rare plants, but wrapped in the center was something else, a small piece of turquoise carved into the shape of a hand. "A healing hand," she explained, that her grandmother had given her when she first began to learn the medicine ways. "I cannot take this," Samuel protested. "It's too precious." "Then keep it safe for me," she said, her eyes holding meanings he was only beginning to decipher. "Until we meet again," as she walked back toward the main fire. Samuel stood holding the stone, feeling the weight of it in his palm like a promise. The night wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of drums, and he knew with sudden certainty that his life had taken a turn from which there would be no going back. The council awaited, with its talk of war and peace and the uncertain future. But for this moment, Samuel allowed himself to simply stand in the darkness, thinking of healing hands and the way firelight looked in black hair, and the possibility that bridges, once built, might stand against any storm. Word of Samuel's attendance at the Apache Council spread through Cimarron Falls like a plague. By the time he returned to town for supplies, the very air seemed poisoned with suspicion and rage. Windows shuddered at his approach. Mothers pulled their children inside, and men gathered in small groups that fell silent and watchful as he passed. At Morrison's store, Jake refused to meet his eyes while filling his order. "That'll be $12, the shopkeeper muttered, though Samuel knew the goods were worth no more than $8. "That's quite a markup, Jake." "Price has gone up. Supply and demand." Morrison's hands trembled as he wrapped the flour. "Folks don't take kindly to Apache lovers. Bad for business, you understand." Samuel laid the money on the counter without argument. Fighting over $4 wouldn't change what was coming. As he loaded his wagon, He noticed Carl Stokes and several other hard cases lounging against the saloon wall, watching him with predatory interest. "Hey, Hayes!" Stokes called out, his voice slurred with whiskey and malice. "Heard you was dancing with them savages. Teaching them war dances, maybe? Planning where to hit us next?" Samuel continued loading his supplies, not trusting himself to respond. But Stokes wasn't finished. "Must be nice, having a red woman warming your bed." "That why your wife died? You got tired of her and wanted some savage instead?" The words hit like a physical blow. Samuel's hands clenched on a flour sack, knuckles white with the effort of control. Mary's memory was sacred, untouchable, and to have it defiled by this whiskey-soaked cur. "That's enough, Stokes." Marshal Tate emerged from his office, hand resting casual-like on his pistol. "Man's got a right to his business without harassment. His business is with murdering redskins." Stokes spat. "My brother was at Cocker Creek when they hit 14 settlers dead, including women and children. And this bastard breaks bread with them." The Apache who attacked Cocker Creek were from Black Wolf's band. "Not Red Skies," Samuel said quietly. "Different chief, different territory. Like blaming all white men for what happened at Sand Creek." The mention of the massacre where Colorado militia had slaughtered peaceful Cheyenne brought an ugly silence. Then Pike stepped forward, his mutilated hand pointing at Samuel like an accusation. "You comparing us to them? White Christians to godless heathens? I'm saying violence breeds violence, no matter who starts it. Maybe if we tried talking instead of shooting." "Talk?" Brennan had joined the group now, bringing the smell of leather and righteous anger. "You can't talk to animals. Hayes, you put them down before they bite." The crowd was growing, men drawn by the prospect of confrontation like flies to carrion. Samuel saw decent folks among them, Thomas the baker, Schmidt the German blacksmith, but their faces showed the same hard suspicion as the others. Fear was contagious, and it had infected the whole town. "Gentlemen," Marshal Tate said, his voice carrying the snap of command, "this is neither the time nor place. Samuel, I suggest you finish your business and head home. The rest of you, find somewhere else to be." For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then Stokes laughed, an ugly sound like tearing canvas. "Sure, Marshal, we'll go, but this ain't over. Not by a long shot." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, leaving Samuel to finish loading under Tate's watchful eye. As he climbed onto the wagon seat, the marshal stepped close. "They're planning something," Tate said quietly. "Don't know what or when, but Stokes has been meeting with some rough characters. Watch yourself." Samuel nodded his thanks and headed out of town, feeling the weight of hostile stares until he was well beyond the last building. It wasn't until he reached the relative safety of his own land that he allowed himself to think about what Stokes had said about Mary. The accusation was obscene, but what made it worse was the grain of truth buried in the filth. Not that he'd wanted Mary gone. God, no. But he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Ayanna, the way she'd awakened something in him he'd thought dead forever. Did that make him a betrayer of Mary's memory? Or would Mary, with her generous heart, understand that a man could grieve forever and still need human connection? That night, sleep eluded him. He sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness and thinking of Ayanna's warnings about bridges burning from either side. The turquoise hand she'd given him seemed to pulse with warmth in his pocket, a tangible reminder of possibilities he couldn't quite name. Near midnight, he heard them, horses approaching slow and careful, trying for stealth. Samuel slipped inside, positioning himself at the window with a clear view of the yard. The painted mare Red Sky had given him nickered nervously in the corral. 4 riders materialized from the shadows, even in the darkness. Samuel recognized Stokes's bulk and Pike's distinctive slouch. They dismounted at the edge of his property, and he could see them passing a bottle between them, building courage for whatever they'd planned. Samuel considered his options. He could ford up in the cabin, but they might burn him out. He could try to slip away, but that would mean abandoning everything he'd built. Or he could confront them, though 4 against 1 were poor odds, even with surprise on his side. A fourth option presented itself in the form of movement on the ridge behind the intruders. Samuel's heart jumped as he recognized the shapes, Apache warriors, moving silent as shadows, drawn perhaps by their duty to protect him under Red Sky's promise. The situation was a powder keg. If the Apache attacked, it would mean war regardless of justification. The town would paint Samuel as a traitor who'd brought savages down on white men, and any hope of peace would die in blood. Moving quickly, Samuel slipped out the back door and circled wide. Coming up behind the Apache position, he nearly died for his efforts. A knife appeared at his throat before he could speak. Then recognition flared in the warrior's eyes. "Shadow Walker," the Apache whispered in accented English. It was the name they'd given him at the council, one who moves between worlds. "No blood," Samuel whispered urgently. "Let me handle this, please." The warrior hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We watch. If they try to harm you, then you can act, but let me try first." Samuel made his way back to the cabin, this time approaching openly from the front. The four men started at his appearance, hands dropping to weapons. "Evening, gentlemen," Samuel said calmly. "Bit late for a social call." "Hayes," Stokes growled, weaving slightly. "We come to give you a message. Could have saved yourself the ride. I was in town today. This kind of message needs delivering personal-like." Pike stepped forward, his ruined hand clenched. "You got 1 week to sell out and leave. After that, well, accidents happen on the frontier. That's your message? Leave or die? Leave or burn?" Brennan corrected. "Way I see it, man who consorts with enemies of his race ain't got no right to protection of law." "And the marshal? What's his say in this?" Stokes laughed. "Tate's one man. Awful lot of territory to cover. Might be he's out of town when your place catches fire. Might be nobody sees who done it." Samuel felt the weight of eyes on him, the Apache watching from the ridge. These men waiting for his response. Everything hung in the balance. "I appreciate you coming all this way to warn me," he said finally. "Shows real Christian charity. Now I'll give you some advice in return. Get off my land, don't come back. And if anything happens to my property, I'll know who to look for. You threatening us?" Pike's voice rose with indignation. "4 of us and 1 of you?" Samuel smiled coldly. "You might want to count again." As if on cue, a coyote called from the ridge, except Samuel knew no coyote sounded quite like that. The 4 men looked around nervously, suddenly aware of the vast darkness surrounding them. "You brought them here?" Stokes hissed. "You got savages watching us right now?" "I brought no one, but Red Sky's protection means what it means. You harm me, you face the consequences." Samuel let that sink in. "Now get out, while you still can." The men backed toward their horses, fear replacing bravado. As they mounted, Stokes pointed a shaking finger at Samuel. "This ain't over. You chose your side. Hayes, remember that when the dying starts." They galloped away, and gradually the night sounds returned. Crickets, an owl, the whisper of wind through cottonwoods. Samuel stood in his yard until he was sure they were gone, then raised a hand toward the ridge in thanks. A figure stood briefly against the stars, raised a lance in acknowledgement, then vanished. Samuel went inside and barred the door, knowing sleep would be impossible now. War was coming, whether he wanted it or not. The question was whether anything he did could change its course, or if he was just one more casualty waiting to happen. He touched the turquoise hand in his pocket and thought of Ayanna, wondered if she was looking at the same stars, feeling the same pull of forces beyond their control. Sometimes bridges weren't enough. Sometimes the flood came anyway, washing away everything in its path. But sometimes, just sometimes, a bridge could save lives. And for that possibility, no matter how slim, Samuel would stand his ground. The night air crackled with tension thicker than desert heat. 3 days had passed since Stokes's ultimatum, and now the inevitable had come. Samuel watched from his position behind the overturned wagon as 24 armed men approached his homestead, their torches painting dancing shadows across the ground. They'd come for war, but they hadn't expected to find the Apache already there. Red Sky's warriors ringed the property like ghosts given form, their arrows nocked and ready. The chief himself sat his great black stallion at the center of the Apache line, Ayanna beside him on her painted pony. She wore the white doe-skin dress from the feast, but now it seemed less ceremonial garment and more statement of defiance. The two forces faced each other across Samuel's yard, white settlers and Apache warriors. Centuries of hatred distilled into this single moment beneath a crescent moon. Samuel stood between them, the no-man's land where he'd lived since pulling Ayanna from the river. "This doesn't have to happen," he called out, his voice carrying across the night air. "No blood needs to be spilled here." Stokes laughed harshly from atop his horse. "Too late for that, traitor. You brought these savages onto Christian land, now you'll burn with them. Look around you. Stokes!" Marshal Tate's voice cut through the night as he emerged from the shadows, badge glinting in the torchlight. "You're outnumbered and outpositioned. Any man fires a shot. It'll be a massacre." Samuel felt a surge of relief at the marshal's presence, though he knew one man's authority might not be enough to prevent bloodshed. "You taking his side, Marshal?" Brennan demanded. "Against your own kind?" "I'm taking the side of law and peace," Tate replied steadily. "Any man here commits violence, he'll answer for it. That goes for both sides," he added, glancing meaningfully at Red Sky. The Apache chief nodded slightly, then spoke in a voice that rolled like thunder. "We come not for war, but to honor debt. This man saved my blood. Any who would harm him must face us. This is Apache law. And this is white man's land," Pike shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "We don't recognize no heathen law." The moment balanced on a razor's edge. Samuel could feel it all about to explode. Years of raids and counter-raids, murders and retributions, all the blood already soaked into this hard ground crying out for more. In seconds, the night would erupt in violence that would spread like wildfire across the territory. Then Ayanna moved. She dismounted with fluid grace and walked into the space between the two groups, head high, every step deliberate. The silver ornaments on her dress caught the torchlight as she moved, and Samuel heard several men draw sharp breaths at her proud beauty. "I am the one saved from the water," she said, her English clear and carrying. "I am the debt that brought this trouble, so I will speak." She turned slowly, addressing both groups with equal gravity. "You say this is white man's land, but who gave it to you? My people have ridden these hills since before your grandfathers' grandfathers drew breath. We have drunk from these springs, hunted these valleys, buried our dead in this earth for more seasons than you have numbers to count." "Savage lies!" someone started, but Tate's sharp gesture cut them off. Ayanna continued as if there had been no interruption. "But we are not fools. We see your numbers grow like summer grass. We see your iron horses and talking wires, your guns that speak louder than thunder. The world changes, and we must change or perish like the buffalo." She pulled something from her belt, the silver medallion that marked Samuel as under Apache protection. But instead of simply showing it, she held it high, letting it spin on its cord, catching the light. "This belonged to Spanish priest who came among us when I was small child. He spoke of his God, tried to teach us his ways. We did not follow his God, but we honored his kindness. When sickness came, he stayed. When soldiers came, he stood between us and their guns. When he died, my father took this to remember, that between enemies can grow respect, even friendship." The wind had died, leaving her words to fall into profound silence. Even the horses seemed to sense the moment's gravity, standing still as carved stone. "This man," she gestured to Samuel, "asked no reward for my life, sought no gain from his kindness. He saw not Apache woman but drowning person, and acted as his heart demanded. This is why my father honors him. This is why we protect him." She turned to face the white men directly. "You fear us. This I understand. We have given you cause, as you have given us. Blood spilled cannot be returned to the body. Dead cannot be brought back by wishing. But perhaps," she paused, seeming to gather herself, "perhaps new paths can be marked by the living." Pretty words. Stokes snarled, though some of the venom had left his voice. But words don't bring back the dead. Words don't rebuild burned homesteads. No, Red Sky spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of years. Words alone change nothing, but words can begin change. This is why I make offer. The chief straightened in his saddle, addressing the crowd with formal gravity. For every white family that treats Apache with respect, I pledge my warriors' protection. For every well that is not poisoned, every treaty that is honored, we will remember. Perhaps we cannot be friends, but perhaps we need not always be enemies. And if we refuse, Brennan asked, though his tone had lost its earlier belligerence. Then you refuse, Red Sky said simply, and blood continues to water this ground until none are left to bleed. Samuel found himself moving forward, drawn by something beyond conscious thought. He stopped beside Ayanna, close enough to smell the sage in her hair, to see the pulse beating rapid at her throat. I've lived among you for 3 years, he said, addressing his neighbors. You know me. You knew Mary. You know I'm no traitor, no Indian lover seeking to harm my own kind. But I've sat with these people, learned something of their ways. They're not the devils we paint them as. They're people, different from us. Yes, but people just the same. They love their children, mourn their dead, want nothing more than to live in peace on the land that's always been theirs. Peace. Pike spat the word like a curse. Tell that to my boy, rotting in an unmarked grave. I grieve for your son, Samuel said quietly, as Red Sky grieves for the children burned in their beds by soldiers, as we all grieve for what this war has cost us. But when does it end? When we're all dead? When the last Apache is driven to the wastes? When the last white settlement burns? What victory is worth that price? Old Thomas the baker, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing, Hayes? Samuel looked at Ayanna, saw his own desperate hope reflected in her dark eyes. I'm proposing we try, just try, no grand treaties, no promises of eternal friendship, just an attempt. Let Red Sky's people trade in town without harassment. Let our children grow up knowing something besides hate. See if maybe, just maybe, we can find a different way. It won't work, Stokes said, but the fire had gone out of him. Too much blood between us. Maybe, Samuel admitted. But what if it does work? What if our children could ride these hills without fear? What if... A child's cry cut through the night. Not hurt, but frightened. On the Apache side, a young mother tried to quiet her baby, brought to witness what might be history or massacre. The sound seemed to break something in the air, remind everyone present of what truly mattered. Schmidt the blacksmith was the first to lower his weapon. I got no quarrel with those who mean no harm, he said in his thick German accent. In old country, I see what happens when neighbor turns against neighbor. Is not good. One by one, others followed suit. Not all. Stokes and his hardcore supporters kept their guns ready, but enough. The moment of crisis passed like a thunderstorm moving on, leaving the air cleaner in its wake. Marshal Tate stepped forward. Seems to me we've got the beginnings of something here. Not peace, maybe, but a chance for it. Any man who wants to ride away now can do so. But anyone who stays agrees to abide by what's been said. No violence, no raids, no poisoned wells. We try. Like Hayes said, just try. Red Sky nodded slowly. This is acceptable. We will camp at 3 Rivers for 1 moon. Any who wish to trade or talk may come. Any who come in peace will be received in peace. He raised his lance high, and his warriors began melting back into the darkness. But Ayanna remained. Standing so close to Samuel, he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. This is dangerous path we begin, she said softly, for his ears alone. Your people and mine. There will be those on both sides who work against it. I know. He met her gaze steadily. But it's a path worth walking. She smiled then. A real smile that transformed her face from handsome to beautiful. Perhaps Shadow Walker is a good name for you. Walking between worlds, making bridges where others see only walls. She pressed something into his hand, a small bundle of herbs tied with a strip of leather from her dress. For protection, she said, and for remembrance. Then she was mounting her pony. riding away with her father's band, leaving Samuel standing in his yard, surrounded by neighbors who looked at him with expressions ranging from respect to suspicion to outright hostility. "You've set something in motion here, Hayes," Marshal Tate said quietly. "God knows where it'll lead." Samuel watched until the last Apache disappeared into the darkness. His hand closed tight around Ayana's gift. "Somewhere different than where we were headed," he replied. "That has to count for something." The crowd dispersed slowly, men muttering among themselves. The immediate threat of violence passed, but the underlying tensions far from resolved. Samuel knew this was only the beginning. There would be setbacks, betrayals, those on both sides who would work to fan the flames of hatred. But there would also be Ayana, and the possibility she represented. As the night grew quiet around him, Samuel allowed himself to hope that bridges, once built, might stand against any storm. Dawn broke over the Colorado Territory like a promise kept, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. The morning after the confrontation found Samuel standing on the rise behind his cabin, looking out over a landscape that seemed somehow different than it had the day before. The same red rocks jutted from the earth, the same cottonwoods lined the river, but there was a quality to the light that spoke of new beginnings. Below in the valley, he could see riders approaching, not the war party he might have expected, but a small delegation from town. Marshal Tate led them, followed by Thomas the baker, Schmidt the blacksmith, and, surprisingly, old Mrs. Morrison, Jake's mother and the closest thing Cimarron Falls had to a matriarch, but it was the riders coming from the other direction that made his heart skip. Ayana rode beside her father, accompanied by 2 elderly Apache women and a handful of warriors serving as escort. The 2 groups would converge at his homestead, neutral ground for this first tentative step towards something that wasn't quite peace, but was no longer war. Samuel descended to meet them, acutely aware that he stood at the center of something unprecedented. As the 2 groups drew together, maintaining careful distance but acknowledging each other with nods, he felt the weight of possibility settling on his shoulders like a mantle. "Mr. Hayes, Mrs. Morrison spoke first, her voice carrying the authority of 7 decades of frontier living. "Some of us have been talking about what was said last night, about trying." She glanced at the Apache delegation, her weathered face unreadable. "My herald was killed by Indians back in '61, spent 20 years hating every red face I saw, but hate's a heavy load for old bones to carry. Maybe it's time to set some of it down." Red Sky dismounted, approaching with the careful dignity of a leader walking unfamiliar ground. "Your words carry wisdom, grandmother," he said, using the term of respect. "I too have carried hate like stones in a bag. Each death adds another stone until a man can barely stand. Perhaps it is time to empty our bags." What followed was carefully orchestrated. Samuel had learned that both cultures valued protocol, though their forms differed. Blankets were spread on the ground. A rough circle formed with Samuel serving as interpreter when needed, though Ayana's English proved more than adequate for most exchanges. The talk started small: weather, the challenges of the coming winter, the need for rain, safe topics that let each side take the measure of the other. But gradually, carefully, deeper issues emerged. "Your young men take our cattle," Brennan said, though without his usual venom. "Makes it hard for a man to feed his family. Your cattle eat the grass where buffalo once fed." One of the Apache elders responded through Ayana's translation. "Our young men grow hungry, watching their old hunting grounds become pasture." Back and forth it went. Grievance matched with grievance. But somehow the mere act of speaking, of being heard, seemed to drain some of the poison from old wounds. When Mrs. Morrison brought out a basket of fresh bread, and Apache women produced dried meat and berries to share. The simple act of eating together created its own form of communion. Through it all, Samuel watched Ayana. She moved between the groups like water finding its level, translating not just words but meanings, smoothing over rough moments with a well-timed clarification or gentle humor. When their eyes met across the circle, he saw in them the same hope tempered with caution that he felt in his own heart. as the sun reached its zenith. Red Sky rose to address the gathering. "We do not forget the past," he said. "Too much blood makes forgetting impossible, but perhaps we can choose different path for tomorrow. I make this offer. My people will respect your marked boundary lines. We'll trade only for cattle freely given. In return, you allow us passage to our sacred places. Stop the poisoning of water that all must share." "And if your young men raid?" Tate asked. "If our hotheads break the peace, then they answer to law." Red Sky said firmly, "Your law for your people, our law for ours, but justice, not vengeance." It was far from a complete solution, but it was a beginning. As the groups prepared to depart, Samuel found himself walking with Ayanna toward the river, drawn by the need for a moment's privacy. "Your father takes a great risk," he said. "There are those among your people who will call him weak for this, as your people will call you traitor," she replied. "But someone must take first step, or we all walk in circles forever." She paused at the riverbank, looking at the water that had brought them together. "Do you remember what I said about bridges? That they can burn from either side?" "Yes, but I have been thinking. Maybe the bridge itself must be strong enough to survive the fires. Maybe—" She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw his own feelings reflected. Maybe bridge must be built from both sides, meeting in the middle. Samuel's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with an ease that felt like coming home. "Ayanna, what are we doing? Your people, mine. There are so many reasons this is impossible." "Yes," she agreed simply. "Many reasons. But the heart has reasons the mind cannot always understand. I have tried to forget the man who pulled me from the water, who spoke with me of healing and loss, who stands between two worlds with courage I have rarely seen. I have tried and failed. I've tried too," Samuel admitted. "Every night I tell myself that Mary was my one chance at love, that to feel for another is betrayal. But then I see your face in the fire, hear your voice in the wind. And I know Mary herself would tell me that a heart that doesn't love is already dead." She lifted their joined hands, studying the contrast of dark skin against light. "If we walk this path, it will not be easy. Both sides will have those who hate us for it. Nothing worth doing is easy," Samuel said. "And maybe that's what our peoples need to see, that Apache and white can be more than enemies. That understanding is possible." "More than understanding," she said softly, and rose on her toes to kiss him. It was a kiss that tasted of sage and possibility, of dangerous futures and necessary hope. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Samuel saw tears on her cheeks that matched his own. "I must go," she whispered, "but I will return. The trading post at 3 Rivers, I will be there each market day. And perhaps," a smile touched her lips, "perhaps Shadow Walker will find reason to visit. Perhaps he will." Samuel agreed, his voice rough with emotion. They walked back to find the delegations preparing to leave. Red Sky's expression as he looked at his daughter, and Samuel was knowing but not disapproving. "The path you choose is hard," he said quietly to Samuel. "But all important paths are, walk it with honor, and you have my blessing." Mrs. Morrison, overhearing, snorted. "Going to take more than blessings to make this work. Going to take good sense and patience and probably a miracle or two. But stranger things have happened on the frontier." She fixed Samuel with sharp eyes. "You bring that girl to dinner Sunday next. About time this town remembered its Christian charity extends to all God's children." As the groups departed in their separate directions, Samuel stood in his yard, feeling as though the world had shifted on its axis. The sun still tracked across the familiar sky, but everything beneath it had changed. In the space of weeks, he'd gone from hermit to bridge between worlds, from grieving widower to a man daring to love again. That night, as he sat by his fire, Samuel held the turquoise hand Ayanna had given him, feeling its smooth surface warm in his palm. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, their songs echoing off canyon walls that had heard such cries for thousands of years. But tonight, their voices seemed to carry a different message, Not warning, but welcome. Not ending, but beginning. He thought of Ayana riding back to her people, carrying the same hope and uncertainty he felt. He thought of the tentative agreements made today, fragile as new ice but holding the promise of spring. He thought of Mary, and felt her blessing like a warm wind at his back, urging him forward into whatever tomorrow might bring. The world was changing, had been changing since the first wagon rolled west. The question was whether that change would bring only death and loss, or whether something new might grow from the ashes of the old. Today, in his small corner of the frontier, they'd planted a seed. Whether it would grow or wither remained to be seen, but the planting itself was an act of faith. Samuel rose and walked to the door, looking out at the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, Ayana was looking at the same stars, feeling the same pull of destiny that drew them together. Their love would be tested by prejudice and politics, by the weight of history and the fear of the future. But it would also be strengthened by every small act of understanding, every bridge built between their peoples, every choice to see the person before the race. The night wind carried the scent of sage and coming rain, of endings and beginnings intertwined like lovers' hands. Samuel breathed it in, feeling more alive than he had in 3 years. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight he would simply stand in his doorway and be grateful for life saved and love found, for bridges built and hope kindled. In the distance, thunder rumbled over the mountains. Not threat, but promise. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would grow from this improbable seed. And Samuel Hayes, standing between two worlds with a turquoise hand in his pocket and a chief's daughter in his heart, smiled into the darkness and whispered a prayer of thanksgiving for second chances and the courage to take them. The story of the man who saved the Apache chief's giant daughter from drowning had become something larger, a story of two peoples finding a way forward together, one careful step at a time. It was a story still being written, its ending uncertain but its beginning full of hope, and in the great tapestry of the West, where so many threads were soaked in blood, this one thread shone different, woven from understanding, strengthened by love, and bright with the possibility that enemies might yet become friends. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Samuel and Ayana's journey as much as I enjoyed telling it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of romance and adventure from the American frontier. What did you think of Samuel and Ayana's story? Will their love bridge two worlds? Or will the forces against them prove too strong? Share your thoughts. I read every comment and love hearing from you all. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset and believing in the power of love to change the world.